There is something almost poetic about Kenyan politics. Not poetic in the romantic sense, no, but in the way it looks back on itself, like a chorus we've heard before, just sung by a different voice, or sometimes the very same voice. In 2022 at Chatham House, then presidential candidate William Ruto offered what sounded like a principled critique of governance in Kenya. He warned against what he called a mongrel system, where the opposition sits in government and government behaves like the opposition. A blurring of lines so complete that accountability itself becomes the casualty. It was a compelling argument, clean, almost surgical. And then back home, in the middle of a fuel crisis at the time triggered in part by the Russia-Ukraine war, the same man, then Deputy President, stood before Kenyans and did something even more striking. He criticized the very government he served in for how they handled that crisis.
On my memo tonight, are we being treated like Condor again? Nearly 3 weeks after the dramatic arrests of 3 senior officials over the latest oil import scandal, not a single charge has been filed. And so the question many Kenyans are now asking is simple. What exactly was that spectacle about? Because if arrests were made, resignations followed, cameras rolled, statements were issued, and yet investigators still have not submitted a file to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, then what are we looking at? The ODPP says it has not yet received the inquiry file from the DCI. So, nearly 3 weeks later,
welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, guys, for your great support. Now, fellow Kenyans, yesterday night was Thursday, and of course, we had got News Gang being led by YVON OKWARA. We had got JAMILA and Sam Gituku. We missed the presence of Bonye together with our very own Wakili, that is Kai Linus. But there is something that these 3 other people discussed. I heard Jamila talking about kubebwa kama kondoo because there are some of the decisions that are happening that they promise that they're going to do, that they pretend as if they're doing, and then they change. And of course, I also heard the issue of oil and all that must have been talked about. And lastly, Yvonne was talking about double standard. Kwamba Kenya iko double standard. So that is what I want you to listen to, fellow Kenyans. But before that, let me humbly request you, to Bonita Media and community and family, that we have a project going on, and kindly please let's all participate if you can. Your 50 bob, your 100 shillings, your 200 shillings is going to be enough. To make sure that we buy paints, so that at least 20 to park these places that these kids are staying and all that. And I know that all is going to be well. Just use the number on the screen, and I know that everything is going to be fine. Most of the time, these politicians, they normally think that they can do everything by themselves. Ya kwamba tutadanganya tu na mambo iwe sawa. They don't know that watu wanapima sana. So I want you to watch this. Then you tell me what to think at the comment section. Can you watch this?
There is something almost poetic about Kenyan politics. Not poetic in the romantic sense, no, but in the way it looks back on itself, like a chorus we've heard before, just sung by a different voice, or sometimes the very same voice. In 2022 at Chatham House, then presidential candidate William Ruto offered what sounded like a principled critique of governance in Kenya. He warned against what he called a mongrel system, where the opposition sits in government and government behaves like the opposition. A blurring of lines so complete that accountability itself becomes the casualty. It was a compelling argument, clean, almost surgical. And then back home, in the middle of a fuel crisis at the time triggered in part by the Russia-Ukraine war, the same man, then Deputy President, stood before Kenyans and did something even more striking. He criticized the very government he served in for how they handled that crisis. And when asked by a journalist about this irony, he blamed it on the form of government at the time.
Kiru Yanet, you don't live in Kenya. I mean, honestly. You know as much as I do the situation in Kenya. You know that what was government is now like the opposition, and what was the opposition is now behaving like it is government. It is that confusion that has visited on the people of Kenya an accountability problem, because there are no more clear lines between the people in the opposition and the people in government, because greedy people who are supposed to be discharging their responsibility on the other side of government, because of greed, decided to come and become cartels and barons in government. So the responsibility we are discharging here is because we believe in the citizenship of our republic. This is somebody else's responsibility, but we are forced to do it because we have the interests of the nation at heart, and we want the right thing to happen in Kenya. We would have chosen to keep quiet.
Same crisis, same plot. Government in opposition, opposition in government. Exactly 4 years ago, he told us this is exactly what erodes accountability. This blurring of lines, this mongrel arrangement where no one quite owns responsibility. 4 years later, we're back here again. Same sector, same questions, same confusion. Only this time, the mongrel government is not an inheritance. It is a creation, his creation. And yet, the explanations keep shifting. Just this week, the president told Kenyans that fuel prices here are higher than in our East African neighbors because Kenya is now a middle-income country. A new rationale, a different frame. But it raises a familiar question. If the problem is structural, if it is about who we are as an economy, then what exactly were we being told in 2022? Because back then, the issue was governance, cartels, failure of leadership. Now it is status, classification, economic identity. So, which is it? And then there is the theater of accountability. Just weeks ago, there were dramatic arrests of senior officials in the energy sector, presented as a sign that action was finally being taken, that the system was working. But nearly 20 days later, there's little clarity, no visible movement towards prosecution, no sense of urgency, just silence. And in that silence, a pattern emerges. The spectacle of accountability is swift. The substance of accountability is slow. So I wonder today, would he still argue that the problem is this blurring of lines, this shifting of responsibility? Or has the explanation changed again? Is it still governance, or is it geopolitics? Or now perhaps our status as a middle-income country? Who exactly is accountable today? Perhaps the real issue isn't the crisis itself, but the convenience with which explanations change. The ease with which yesterday's diagnosis is abandoned for today's justification. And in that quiet shift, accountability doesn't just weaken, it disappears. That's my take.
On my memo tonight, are we being treated like Kondo again? Nearly 3 weeks after the dramatic arrests of 3 senior officials over the latest oil import scandal, not a single charge has been filed. And so the question many Kenyans are now asking is simple. What exactly was that spectacle about? Because if arrests were made, resignations followed, cameras rolled, statements were issued, and yet investigators still have not submitted a file to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, then what are we looking at? The ODPP says it has not yet received the inquiry file from the DCI. So nearly 3 weeks later, we are still stuck at the same place. What happened? Who did what? Who knew what? And who is responsible? Because at the beginning, we were told swift action had been taken. 3 senior officials were arrested. Resignations followed. The message to the country was clear. Accountability is here. But now, with no charges, no file, and no clear progress, suspicion is growing that perhaps the country was being shown a performance, hey look, we are doing something moment. And this is where the old question comes back. Are we being treated like Kondo again? Because many central questions remain unanswered. The Energy CS said he was not aware. He blamed the 29-member Vessel Alignment Committee. The committee says there was a crisis after a vessel got stuck at the Strait of Hormuz. Others say they moved swiftly. But what makes this even more troubling is that this was an importation process that appears to have been initiated through the highest officers. Yet when questions are asked, nobody seems able to clearly explain how it happened. That is what is deeply unsettling. Because fuel importation at this scale does not happen in a vacuum. It involves approvals, briefings, coordination, and decisions that ordinarily move through the highest levels of government and administration. So how do we get to a point where the country is told this came from the top, yet when questions are asked, nobody can give a straight answer? How does something so consequential seem to have no clear ownership? And Kenyans are left watching a maze of denials. And now as fuel prices go up and wananchi pay higher to get fuel at the pump, we're once again being asked to remain calm. But calm without clarity only deepens suspicion. And if there was wrongdoing, then let us see the charges. If there was no wrongdoing, let's be clear about it and let the country know. But what we cannot have is a country taken through the drama of arrests and resignations only for the matter to disappear into silence. That is when people begin to wonder whether the wool was being pulled over our eyes all along, or it was another Kondo moment. That is my memo.
Recently, Parliament passed the Supplementary Appropriations Act 2026, a new law allocating the government an extra budget of 393 billion shillings. That effectively raised the current year's budget to 4.7 trillion shillings. In those allocations, almost 60% is meant to finance recurrent expenditure. Days later, Parliament's Public Accounts Committee embarked on hearings to establish expenditure by certain offices, including the Office of the Deputy President, and we saw members of Parliament wonder how the office spent up to 8 million shillings to hire a chopper in a day. And the committee was divided.
There's a particular entry for a chopper for Taraka, Laikipia, Isiolo, Taraka, and Kitui. One day only, it's 8 million.
Kipipiri, Taraka, Kagera, Kinoru, Meru, Taraka.
It's common sense. Kwani where is his home?
The deputy president has a right to go home and come back.
Using public resources?
Yes, but he's the deputy president.
I had asked also whether it is practicable to spend 8 million on one day. That at least you can respond to.
We'll demonstrate all that when you give the
documentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, oftentimes when members of Parliament are put to task over their role in oversighting the national executive, they tend to turn defensive. Some of them question the authenticity of reports that the media relies on in publishing stories of possible misuse of public funds. And they make a case that whatever media outlets publish should not be believed, as it is likely one-sided. One-sided to mean the opinion of the Controller of Budget or the Auditor General as the case may be. MPs say this even when that information originates from Parliament in committees that MPs themselves sit in. Even when the Public Accounts Committee questioned the expenditure of the Office of the Deputy President, some of the legislators were appalled. Others had excuses for the high office. And so, why spend time to express shock before the cameras? Or is it just for show? You see, at the end of every quarter, the Controller of Budget must file a report with Parliament on the state of budget implementation. And those reports are usually rich with information. They explain how state and public offices are using money allocated to them and whether they are keeping with their expected flow. When the Controller of Budget reports that State House spent 91% of its annual budget in just 6 months, or that the Office of the Deputy President spent 89% of its budget in the first 6 months of the year, you would expect Parliament to be concerned. For MPs to sound indifferent and state that they will have to wait for the auditor to establish if there was value for money, why then have Controller of Budget reports filed with Parliament? You see, the Controller's report is a compilation of information as reported by the respective accounting officers. For clarity, the State House expenditure report is based on what the Controller of State House reported. And that is crucial information because it shows you that State House does not have money to run the remainder of the financial year. And that is why they went back to Parliament for a supplementary budget, which they were given, doubling State House allocation to 17 billion shillings. How easy it is for MPs to allocate more money, but appear not interested in monitoring the expenditure, even if just to echo what the Controller said. You know why MPs must now pay attention? Last week, the government subsidized petroleum prices while also foregoing half of VAT on fuel. This means that we are already staring at revenue shortfall in this final quarter of the financial year. And when that happens, there may be no choice but to consider another supplementary budget, only that this time it may have to reduce allocations. What will MPs do? Will they say they will have to wait for the Auditor General to determine if there was value for money in the fuel subsidies or tax cuts? Yet, even those reports of the Auditor General receive similar contempt as those of the Controller of Budget. Have you not heard MPs criticize the Auditor for, quote, leaking reports to the media? Reports which are already filed with Parliament and therefore are public documents. What an inconvenience. And so how exactly do departmental budgets pass in Parliament when there is litany of questions raised about expenditure? What's the incentive? Would you mind asking your MP? That's my sense tonight. Yeah, I mean, when you listen to the sentiments of the Cabinet Secretary for Energy, of course, it is true that those government interventions have really lowered the prices of fuel because you're looking at the intervention on the VAT, but also the subsidy itself, because, like he says, you can imagine paying for a litre of kerosene instead of 267 shillings. I mean, instead of, so the price would have been at 267 shillings, but now Kenyans are having to pay 152 shillings, which is way lower than even the landed cost, because the landed cost is about 170 shillings of kerosene. So quite some remarkable intervention there that has lowered those prices. But at the same time, there must be questions to be raised. If you're to recall, this conversation started on the 9th of March when the National Security Council Committee held a meeting under the leadership of the head of public service and took note of the situation within the Middle East and how it was going to affect the international trade, but also specifically on the oil supplies for the country. It is in that meeting that certain decisions were taken, including the directive to the PS in charge of petroleum development to go ahead and explore and implement alternative sources of the products without necessarily depending on one region. So if on 9th of March that was known and the prices were to be declared on the 14th of March and then 14th of April. So a question emerges, how come the prices on 14th were determined late in the night. You were live on air. I think it was past 9:30 or thereabout.
Yes.
That's when the statement came in. How come the president had to rush the following day, I think it was in the afternoon hours, to announce that the VAT was being reduced to 8%? One wonders why, because Parliament was in operation, it was in existence. They may have taken a short recess for Easter, but it is possible in this country to recall people for a special sitting very quickly to conduct important business, even if it means impeaching a deputy president. So really, why didn't we see all that proactivity happening in the weeks to 14th of April?
Methodically.
Because
efficiency.
When you find yourself that you have declared prices late in the night on 14th, which is Tuesday night, then Wednesday you make an announcement and you enforce new prices that night, and you send a press statement that was sent by EPRA, citing legal notice number 70. Knowing too well you're giving a legal notice that is illegal.
Yes.
Because
didn't exist at
the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary has no power to reduce the VAT from whatever it is by the extent of 50%.
Yeah.
He has only power to reduce it up to 25%. So that would mean up to 4 percentage points if you had to consider the VAT rate of 16%. Yeah. So he could have reduced it to 12%. He chose to reduce it to 13%. So why didn't Parliament work so hard ahead of time to come up with a bill to amend? It took an hour, 20 minutes, and like you said, that
an hour, 2 minutes.
Oh, an hour,
1 hour, 2 minutes. That 1 hour, 2 minutes could have happened on
before
27th of 26th, because 27th was a Friday, 26th of March. Or even on
the 14th itself.
On the 14th, the same evening.
The afternoon
and
of the 14th.
sign it very quickly so that it becomes law. So I think that was a bad precedence for Parliament and the executive. It shouldn't happen again, because you see, this time round, it was to the benefit of Kenyans. Fine, you can say that you can break the law to benefit. How about tomorrow, when you want now to raise it with some adverse effects on Kenyans? And it doesn't mean that reducing the VAT to 8% does not have adverse effects. It does, only that for the greater good, it's better that you have the prices lower. So I think Parliament needs to rethink and determine how it wants to have a relationship with the executive. And I know it's confusing. It can be confusing because you find yourselves...
It really isn't.
You're at State House making decisions for the political party. Next minute you're making decisions for Parliament. Next minute you're proposing a bill. Then you're escorting it to be signed at State House. But they really need to do their work, because the Constitution gives mandate to only one institution, that is Parliament, to pass policy that has legal effect in the Republic of Kenya. Anything the President declares in the rallies
is not,
or in a gazette notice that is illegal, it is illegal, it is unconstitutional.
Or if this particular continues and, the violence escalates and the war escalates to, right now it's... it's a bit here and there, the cessation of hostilities, in Iran, there's talks that happen, don't happen,
Strait of Hormuz are open for a few hours, closed again.
But if this became really, really serious, and not just with the energy, look at horticulture sector, look at the meat product sector. With all of these, we need a very serious plan about how we handle ourselves in the event of emergency. But what we've seen since April the 3rd, and maybe, the meetings preceding that, these things are a little haphazard, and then there's a scandal here, money may have been lost, this is what's happened, people are arrested, dramatically resign, but, this is not how you handle crisis. Not in a government, not in a company, and certainly not in a household. Here's the thing, and the implication, and just like we're saying with the issue of goons, we need to look at the wider implication of what that means. Same thing here. The President may very well have good intentions and great intentions to cushion Kenyans. But if he is able to make a statement, and then Parliament comes in to do that, two things for me that it says. Is Parliament, who's the dog and who wags the tail, right? And does Parliament then do the President's bidding? Because that's exactly what happened with this VAT. That's number one. Number two, you're saying, well, he could increase VAT, but he could also make some other changes or some other statements that have serious, heavy legal consequences, and then Parliament will come in to what they like to call regularize. This is not just about VAT. If this is about a decision being made by the executive, and then Parliament comes in to rubber stamp it, essentially, this could happen with VAT. It could happen with any other law. It could happen with any other law. And that law might or might not be in favor of an individual, of a people, of a segment, of a sector. What happened should never happen again, and is very dangerous, and goes against the tenets of the Constitution, which is the separation of powers. They had the opportunity to do this tidily. They did not, because it was the utadu attitude. This is what I have decided. And it was also political expediency. That's why you make the announcement in the middle of Suneka, surrounded by crowds and mobs out of a rooftop. What else will be politically convenient and then passed off as legislation?